Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Defenders Live. I'm your host, Lora Thorson. Tonight, I don't have a special guest, but I do have a topic of thought for you. A while back, I posted a graphic that said, calm is a skill, not a feeling. And when I posted that, I really thought about it more deeply as time went on. And I thought there's some real truth to this that I really want to dig into. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. And then a few of you messaged me about this. So I think there are other people that are maybe curious about this concept of, can calm be a skill or is it just a feeling? So let's dig into this. I think the reason that it hit the way that it did for some people is because many of us have been walking around just assuming that calm is like a personality type or something. And some people, maybe they're just born with it and they have a longer fuse and a cooler head. And the rest of us just walk around white knuckled through life, right? And hope for the best. And I'm not sure if that's actually true. And so I thought, what if that isn't true? Because I have a deep sense that that's not true. And so I reached out to one of my recent guests, retired Navy SEAL Chris Wyllie, and I had a conversation with him about it. And it was actually a really good conversation because he talked about a time when he was in a car accident. And he said that everyone that was in the car, and there were like 6 people total in the car, everyone in the car was panicking. It was really chaotic and scary. So it was like completely understandable, right? That people were panicking. But he was the only one who stayed calm and took authority in that situation. And he said that was the first time that it occurred to him that this was a trained thing, that calm was a thing that he had literally trained into himself over time. And he attributed it to his years of training in some of the most intense environments on the planet. And while he was talking, I was thinking that this must be his nervous system has literally like recalibrated and calm has become his default. So once again, I thought this isn't a feeling, but a skill. And then I asked him if it had always been that way. And he said he hadn't always been that way. Before he was in the military, he had often kind of like come unglued in times when he should have been able to stay calm and he wasn't able to. So it was very obvious that training had made him that way. Before we go any further, I want to widen this out just a little bit because this isn't just about self defense situations or worst case scenarios or emergencies. I mean, literally think about what an untrained stress response can cost you every single day and how you respond when your spouse says just the wrong thing at just the wrong time. Have you ever been in that situation? Or how do you handle it when your kid is pushing every button you have and you've already had a really long day? It's how you show up when things at work are falling apart and people are looking to you for direction. So the stakes of not building this skill aren't just like a tactical thing, right? Or a self-defense thing. They're a life thing. They're relational, they're personal, and they're playing out in your life right now, whether you realize it or not. And I've had some of my own experiences in this department that I'll share with you a little bit later. So let's talk about this on what's actually happening inside your body when this happens. Because once you understand the mechanism, it'll start to make sense. And many of you in the training community are well aware of this, but many may not be. And this is really valuable information. So you have 2 systems that are running in your brain at all times. And one of these systems is called the amygdala. It's kind of like your smoke detector, and its job is to keep you alive. And the moment that it perceives a threat, whether that threat is real or imagined, which is very important, it will fire off. And when it fires, your body will flood with adrenaline. Your heart rate will spike, your vision will narrow, and your fine motor skills will start to degrade. And you can imagine as a shooter how important those fine motor skills are, right? But you're fully in reaction mode. Now, the second system is your prefrontal cortex, and this is where your thinking brain lives, your reasoning, your decision making, and precise decision making. And this is where you want to be in a high stress situation. But the problem is, under intense stress, your amygdala dominates. and access to your thinking brain degrades. So I want you to know this isn't a character flaw. This is just how you're wired. This is how all humans are wired. And your amygdala cannot tell the difference between a life threatening situation and a hard conversation at the dinner table. That was hard for me to wrap my brain around, but it is true. It treats both of those things like emergencies if to you deep down those are emergencies. So I got a firsthand education on this just last week in a run, and I was running a pretty decent clip, I guess. I had a weight vest on, so I had some weight going on, but I hadn't run in quite some time. And so I wasn't conditioned for what I was doing. And I came out a little bit hot, and I have a tendency to do that sometimes. And I relearned this lesson again of not coming out too hot. But what happened was I really got out of breath in the first mile. And I started to feel that panicky sort of sensation when you can't catch your breath. And I realized what was happening. And the only way that I was able to get my heart rate back under control and get the thinking side of my brain going again and not just like panicking was through my breath. It wasn't easy, but it was a small example of how that training, if you know what to do, can be so important, and it can be applied in everyday life. So that experience taught me again that there is something to be practiced over and over. This is not a one and done thing. It's the same with gaining a skill behind the gun or in martial arts or whatever the case may be. And this brings me to the most important thing that I learned from Chris. The Navy SEAL training actually creates systematic, deliberate, repeated exposure to intensity, not necessarily to punish, although I'm sure it feels like punishment, but to expand the level of capability. So this can be anything from like cold water, physical endurance and suffering, time pressure, or life and death scenarios. But they're exposed to this over and over again. And each time Chris went through something like that and came out the other side, his nervous system got new information that he survived it, right? And so by surviving that, he also got the information, his brain did, that he could handle it, that it wasn't maybe as big as he thought it was. And then that threshold just kept rising and rising slowly over time. And Chris said something else that really stuck with me. He said that fear of something is almost always much bigger in your mind than the reality of it. And the anticipation is usually the worst part. And every time you walk through the hard thing anyway, every time you do something you weren't sure you could do, your brain files it differently. It updates its threat database. So that is literally a neurological thing happening inside your brain when you do hard things. Now, I know I have the like mantra, put your shoes on. This kind of goes along with that. So some of you might be thinking, okay, that's great for a Navy SEAL. I'm not a Navy SEAL. Okay. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Because you don't need buds. You don't need buds. You just need the principle. So here are 3 ways to build this in your own life starting right now. The first is controlled physical stress. The best example I can give you of this is what I'm personally doing right now, which is training for the tactical games. The tactical games competition puts my body under real pressure, elevated heart rate, physical exertion, and time pressure, and then asks me to do precise shooting that requires a calm thinking mind. Now, has it always been this way? Do I always do this right? No, I remember in the last competition I was in, I got a little bit ahead of my skis, let's say, and we had this stage where we had to row. I forget the specifics, but we had to row and then we had to shoot. And if we had any misses, we had to do burpees, I think, as makeups for our shots, and then go back to the rower. And it kept on going on for so many rounds. And I was like, I came out of the gate hot again. This is one of the things I have to personally work on for myself. But I was so confident. I came out of the gate really fast. I was the first person off the rower. And I think I only missed a couple shots on the first round. But as time went on, because I had come out too hot, by the time I came off the rower the second or third time, I started missing more shots, which meant more burpees, which meant more time. And finally, by the second or third round, I was like, wait a second, I have miscalculated this. I need to reel this back in. I need to get control of my breathing, because that's most of the reason why I was missing the shots, because my heart rate was too high to accurately shoot. And it wasn't like, I don't think necessarily my amygdala was hijacked. I wasn't necessarily panicking, but when I can control myself, control my breathing, then I can control my mind, and my actions follow that. And so that was, again, another example of, how sometimes you can get out ahead of your skis and you have to reel it back in. So it doesn't have to be a competition though, but competition is a really good way. Shooting competition, if you're a shooter, or any other kind of competition, martial arts, where you just put yourself under that physical exertion or some kind of uncomfortableness, and make yourself have to stay calm and stay in control. Other examples of this could be like cold plunging. I know that's like a really big thing right now. Interval training, something that puts your body under genuine stress and then asks you to stay mentally present while you're doing it. You're training the gap between the stimulus and the response. That's literally what you're doing. And Brian Hill mentioned this on a show that I had him on recently. I forget the name. There was a word for it, but he called that training the gap between the stimulus and the response. And the gap is where the calm lives. So the second thing you can do is deliberate small dose exposure to what scares you. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think one of the best things that you can do is pick something that scares you just a little bit, but also gets you a little bit excited. Like, man, if I reached for that and I actually did the work to get there, that would be really, really fulfilling. And so deliberate small dose exposure is really important. It's not like reckless stuff. It's not, like jumping out of an airplane when you're not ready for it kind of stuff. It's the things you've been avoiding because they're uncomfortable. I mean, this could be as simple as having a really hard conversation that you've been putting off, because trust you and me, there are certain conversations I've had in my past that set off my stress response. I mean, it's real. It doesn't have to always be like a competition or physical fitness. Or choose to get an environment that makes you uneasy. The skill you're afraid to try in front of other people is probably what you should be going towards. You should walk towards those things, but start small. Every time you do, you collect evidence that you can handle more than you thought. And that evidence stacks into a different version of you over time. It really, really does. It sounds nuts, but it's true. I am proof of that. The third thing is tactical breathing. And there are different ways you can breathe to keep yourself calm. But this particular type of breathing is called box breathing, where you inhale for 4 counts, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and hold for 4. And this was developed for special operations, and it works because it directly activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the biological counterweight to the stress response. So you are pressing a psychological reset button with nothing but your breath. And this actually works, you guys. Practice it before you need it, so it's automatic when you do. This is like, all these things should be practiced in advance, not in the middle of the chaos. But I want to say this clearly. None of this is only about emergencies. The untrained amygdala is just as destructive in a slow burn situation as it is in an acute crisis, a hard marriage, a financial problem that grinds on you for months, a health scare. This is where most of your life actually happens, and a trained, governed mind changes all of it, which is why 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 is one of my favorite verses on the planet, and it really hits differently for me now than it ever used to. And it reads, "For God has not given us," I get choked up every time. "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and discipline." Discipline. That word discipline means sound-mindedness, a governed mind, a mind that is ordered and capable of clear thinking under pressure. Paul wrote that from a prison under threat of execution. He wasn't describing a feeling. He was describing a structural reality based on scripture, based on who he knew God was, and relying and trusting in that. Now that's like a whole other level. Is it not? So why does all of this matter specifically for those of us who carry or have decided to become defenders of life? The real reason, you guys, is because a hijacked defender is dangerous. A hijacked person with a gun is a very dangerous person in not the right way. The right tool in the wrong mental state is not protection, it's a liability. Calm is what allows you to assess before you act, to see options when panic would close them off. And the calmest person in the room usually leads the room, and in my experience, is usually the most dangerous. In a threat, in a family emergency, and I meant dangerous in a good way, and any moment where someone needs an anchor. So let me give you another example of me realizing in real time that I had been hijacked and I had to bring myself back to who I really am, who God has made me to be. I was in a conversation with a friend. It was a little bit of a tense conversation, and there was some bantering back and forth, and we each were activating each other's stress response, right? It was like it was happening, but I was in a reactive mode. I was getting defensive in this conversation, and I knew I was getting defensive and I didn't want to be defensive, but it just took over. And that's what happens sometimes if you haven't trained this enough. But the good news is that part of the way through the conversation, when we were just like feeding off of each other and we weren't getting anywhere, it felt like, what is going on right now? I literally just stopped, and he kept going, blah, 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 blah. And I just took a deep breath and I recalibrated myself. I realigned myself, and I just stopped talking. I stopped participating in the chaos. And when he stopped talking, it was just quiet. I had regained my power, my strength in that particular moment. And I could think again. I could think clearly. And because I wasn't operating from my amygdala anymore, I was operating from my prefrontal cortex again. And then after that, the conversation went much better because I was actually calm and I was able to think rationally, and we were able to end the conversation in a good, clean way. But there's an example. I'm sure you guys have had all kinds of examples like that where you like get into this tussle and you just go into reaction, or which can look like defensiveness, it can look like anger, it can look like many things. If you can catch yourself in that and realign yourself, I call it realign, back to your foundation, then you can go back to that place and you don't have to stay completely activated in that moment. So there's an example. So the deepest layer of this whole conversation, and I want to make sure I don't rush past this, is at some point, if you do the work, calm will stop being something you do, and it will start becoming who you are. And that is a completely different thing. There is a world of difference between I practice breathing and I am someone who doesn't panic. One is a technique and the other one is an identity. Who do you want to be when it gets loud, when stuff starts hitting the fan? Because that person is not built in the crisis. That person is built right now in the quiet, in the training, in the small daily decision to lean into discomfort instead of away from it. And that's the only way you're going to get there. So here's what I want to leave you with. Calm is a skill. It lives in your biology. It is trainable. And it has to be built before you need it, much like the other skills that we train, because there is no time to learn it in the moment. Chris Wyllie was not born calm. He was forged through years of hard things stacked on top of each other. until his nervous system became something different. You're not going to go through what he went through, but you can follow the same principle in your own way. So if you pick one thing this week, whatever it may be, a cold shower, a hard conversation, a competition you're going to sign up for, a breathing practice before your feet hit the floor in the morning, the size of the step matters less than the direction, because the small steps aren't really the point. The person you're making yourself into is the point. And God didn't give you a spirit of fear or timidity. He gave you the raw material for a sound, disciplined, powerful mind. But capacity has to be developed. The gift has to be trained, and it gets trained one small, deliberate decision at a time, long before the moment that will one day ask everything of you. Calm isn't waiting for you on the other side of a crisis. It's waiting for you on the other side of a decision. So I encourage you to make that decision today. I'm happy with that. I'm glad that I explored this topic more deeply than just a meme, a graphic on social media. And I hope you got something out of that. You know, the stories that I told you about my own experience shows I'm not perfect in this area, but I'm definitely working on it. And I'm definitely better than I used to be. I mean, now I can catch myself in the middle of it and I can bring myself back. Maybe someday I'll be like Chris Wyllie and and I'll just be that person. But it's like everything else that you work towards in life. It needs to be intentional, and you need to have awareness of it before you can change it. So hope that helps you tonight, and I will see you again next week.